great speech.
I call Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the last gentleman to talk on this bill talked about a balance, and I completely agree, but I suspect that my definition of balance varies greatly from that member's. Mr Speaker, for me, it's about getting a balance between what the public perception of police are, what the public believes the role of the police is, versus a public good. And at the moment, Mr Speaker, I have some concerns that the public's confidence in the police's ability to solve crime and do their job is eroding. Mr Speaker, I have great concerns that if the public now sees the police charging for their services, it will further erode the confidence that we have in our policemen and women. Now, I want to say I think our policemen and women do a fantastic job. They are under-resourced. In fact, 60% of officers in the recent workplace survey said that they are not meeting the promises they make to the public. And that is of huge concern. But a way forward, Mr Speaker, is not to start charging for the police's service. That is not a way to raise money. It is not a way to gain the confidence of the public. And I also think it is not a way to actually reinforce the objective manner of the police. So if we take this a step further, where does it go? Is this a slippery slope towards privatisation? Well, in essence, this is the first step towards privatisation, because whenever you require a government service to pay for something, that is privatisation. And in a small step, I must admit, but where does this lead to? Where does this go? So what the police have said is that this will, and I quote, leads to greater transparency of the use of public money, and agencies consider their use of services more carefully once costs are internalised. So what this is saying, Mr Speaker, is if the person or if an organisation who requires vetting can't afford this, then they won't take up the option. But on the flip side of that, Mr Speaker, what we are demanding more and more as a society is to be kept safe from those who are causing mischief. A lot of the people who require police vetting, this isn't a nice to have, a voluntary measure. This is now a compulsory measure that we have required through statute from this House. So what we are in fact doing is imposing greater costs on a lot of agencies, schools, institutions, organisations, charities, that in fact are picking up a lot of the burden that is left by a government who's left people behind. Why should schools have to pay for police vetting of their staff? Why should kindergartens have to pay for police vetting when I believe it is a fundamental role of police to keep our society safe? We are now saying, no, it's not the police's role, it is the kindergarten's role. But we must use the police because they are the only organisation with the ability and the resources to undertake the sort of vetting that we as a parliament require. That is privatisation, and that is wrong, Mr Speaker. But where will this lead to? Will this lead to a point in time where the wealthy suburbs, because they can afford to pay police cars to patrol, that they end up being patrolled, where the suburbs down the road who aren't as wealthy or for whom a lot of constituents' life is a challenge, they can't pay, therefore they get one police car and these guys get 3 police cars? What we're also told, Mr Speaker, is this is what happens in other jurisdictions. Well, Mr Speaker, in most other jurisdictions, police carry guns. But because they do it in other jurisdictions, are we saying that we must do it in ours? In a number of policing areas, in a number of policing initiatives, Mr Speaker, we have been world leading. We are not followers. We are not a police force that says, well, we really don't know what's going on here, therefore we've got to look over the ditch and see what the Australians are doing or what the Americans are doing or what the Brits are doing. Goodness me, Mr Speaker, if we had a look at a lot of these jurisdictions and copied their methods of policing, we would be in huge trouble. Mr Speaker, I believe at this point in time, the police are at a little bit of a crossroads. What we've had is we've had a minister who in only May of this year signed off on a 4-year strategic plan for police. Excuse me. In that plan, it said there was going to be no more police for another 4 years. During that time, the police minister's come out and admitted that was a mistake. We need more police. We've had the Commissioner say less than 2 weeks ago we don't need more police, and yet we get a resolution rate for stolen vehicles of less than 10%, for burglaries of less than 10%. We're having officers move from community police stations brought into head office. Thank you very much. Policing in this country, Mr. Speaker, is diminishing in its effectiveness to solve crime and to keep our communities safe. And yet here we are, Mr. Speaker, with this bill requiring those organisations who actually are in charge of keeping our children safe, our elderly safe, our poor safe, we require them to pay for police services. Is that right? I don't think it is. Mr. Speaker, it's no coincidence that nearly every submitter during the Select Committee process said this was the wrong thing to do. Now, maybe at a future point in time, when the police are adequately resourced, when they are solving crimes, when burglaries are getting solved, when people are phoning the police with confidence knowing they're going to turn up, maybe we need to look at that then. But I think policing works really, really well when our communities have confidence that our police are doing their job in a way that meets the expectations of the public. And I don't think that this bill does that. Mr. Speaker, let's be honest about this. The policing budget is huge. It really is. It's a significant amount of money. This bill is not going to bring in much money. It's not. So what we're debating here is really a philosophical point. We're not debating a fiscal point. So I would argue that at this point in time, we need to take the philosophy of user pays back, take it off the table, and get back on the table the philosophy of community policing. We need to bring back the belief within our communities that police are there for us and to protect us, and not to those who can pay the money. So what happens, Mr. Speaker, if there is a concert and the concert promoter can afford to pay for police, so the whole of Western Springs is ringed by police, and then there's another concert to raise money for, I don't know, Oxfam or a disaster or another charity, and they can't afford, because it's not about them, it's about raising money for a charity, but they can't afford police. Are the Rolling Stones more deserving of a ring of police than Oxfam? I don't think so, but I also don't think that the public believe that, Mr. Speaker. That's why we are voting against this bill, and that is why I would like the opposition members who are going to speak on this bill, and the Minister who has already spoken on this bill and who is responsible for shepherding this bill through the House, to perhaps take another look at it, to understand that perhaps this will will continue the erosion of confidence that we have in our police force. And the other thing that sort of concerns me, Mr. Speaker, is that in that workplace survey, over 80% of the police excuse me, said that they are committed to the force. Over 80% of police said they're committed to our communities. The men and women on the front line who wear that uniform have an absolute commitment to doing what is right for our communities. But what it also said in that survey, the lowest ranking answer, over 60%, said they do not believe that their voices are being listened to by the police hierarchy. They do not believe that their ideas and their feedback is getting through to those who are making decisions. And I can understand the men and women on the front line looking at this and saying amongst their groups around the water coolers, goodness me, this is just one more step when people are going to look at us and go, what is going on? Why do we have to pay for your services? Instead of saying, the police can do this in an efficient manner, and that is what we need to have done. Mr. Speaker, as mentioned, just to sum up, we are debating a philosophical point here and where we take the police in the next 3 to 4 to 5 to 10 years. I firmly believe that we need to get the focus of the police back to community, back to serving community and serving those organisations who are there to serve our community. Mr. Speaker, I do not believe it is a good idea to have the police to start charging for services that they have done for free in the past. If we want the police to undertake these services, then my plea is we need to resource them in an adequate manner. That is the solution, Mr. Speaker, not user pays. Thank you very much.